All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're here with the Condair webinar series where today we'll be going over indoor air hydration for humans, improving human health, learning, and productivity. So today there'll be three presenters. Myself, Graham Holmes. I'm a technical product manager at Condair. I'll be going over Humidification 101, a basic introduction over Condair's product lines and how we size humidifiers. Next will be Dr. Stephanie Taylor. She'll be going over the health implications for proper humidification between 40 and 60%. Finally, we'll have Chris Habits here at Condair. He's a business development manager for our energy and sustainability sector, and he'll be looking at how to save energy and reduce your carbon footprint by sizing adiabatic humidifiers. So after today's webinar, you should be will be able to understand the importance of indoor air hydration to support health and the interplay of proper humidification, energy use, and design of the built environment will be discussed, and tools for you to achieve optimal outcomes will be offered. So to start with Humidity 101, I'd like to go over what is humidity and why we humidify. So I'm sure many of you have seen the psychrometric chart. If you haven't, it is one of the most intimidating graphs to look at out there, but it is extremely easy to work through once you know what to look at. The graph contains many different parameters. The most important 7 I have listed here, from enthalpy, saturated temperature, volume of water per cubic foot per pound for air, the humidity ratio, so pound of moisture per pound per air, our dry bulb temperature, percent relative humidity, and the wet bulb temperature. So looking in at both absolute humidity and relative humidity, absolute humidity is the mass of water vapor divided by the mass of dry air and volume of air at any given temperature. So this is really how much moisture there is in the air itself. Whereas relative humidity is the ratio of the current absolute humidity to the highest possible absolute humidity. So as air increases and decreases in temperature, it can hold more or less moisture, and that relative humidity can be expressed as a percentage. So if we want to simplify that even further, the amount of water vapor in the air relative to the maximum water vapor that the air can hold at that given temperature, and then simplify it again for absolute basics, is how full of moisture the air is in a percentage. So as an example, if we are at 41 degrees Fahrenheit and at 80% RH, we increase the temperature up to 81 Fahrenheit, that would reduce the relative humidity down to 20% RH without adding or removing any more moisture from the air. So you can express this on the psych chart. So the curved bands are the relative humidity bands on there, and the dry bulb temperature is at the bottom. So by increasing temperature, we move along the horizontal line between the two relative humidity bands, and you can increase from that 80% to 20%. So at Condair, we have every humidification product available. It's broken into 2 different categories, so isothermal or adiabatic. Isothermal is generally the more common and more conventional way of adding humidification. This would be boiling water and creating steam. It can be done in a number of ways, using either gas as an energy source. You can have an electric energy source, much like a kettle, as a resistive element humidifier is. And as well, you can use building steam, so from their boiler system in live steam applications. On the adiabatic side, there's 3 typical ones for HVAC design. There would be evaporative media. This is a sheet of media that you would basically pour water over and pass the airstream through. The second would be nozzles, so atomizing nozzles that would spray water into the airstream itself, and high pressure systems as well. The main differences between the two is for isothermal, it involves a constant temperature. So by adding the steam, the airstream doesn't heat up at all. It's just simply adding steam to the system. For an adiabatic type of humidifier, it relating to denoting a process or condition in which heat does not enter or leave the system concerned. So that means by adding the water to the system, we actually use the energy of the system, so the airstream, to change that water from liquid into a gaseous state. So we get a cooling benefit from this process as well. So for Condair's available product line, we break it out into 4 overall categories. From the steam generation side, we have electrode, resistive, gas humidifiers, and central steam as well. So it could be live steam, so direct steam from the boiler, or a steam to steam system where we generate clean steam by using the steam as a heat source and having a heat transfer in there as well. And then for the atomization or evaporative technologies, the 3 that I had talked about originally in the HVAC duct application would be that wetted media, the ME series, high pressure nozzles with the HP series, the hybrid or the DL series, which combines the 2 technologies. Chris will talk about that more later on in the presentation. And then we have the direct room systems, and there's a variety of different ways that we have. No other company in the humidification business has quite a full product line as we do, and we cover any possible technology for the system. Rule of thumb for humidification on the cycle chart, for isothermal or the steam products, your humidity add will be a vertical line on the graph, and for the adiabatic evaporative technologies, you'll have to follow the enthalpy line on the side as there's no energy added to the system. So you'll have that diagonal line. So much of the time, humidification is called for during industrial processes. It can be used from printing plants to handling electric static discharge for computer chips and different manufacturing on that side. But why not for people? And why between 40 and 60% RH? And I'll let Dr. Taylor get to that. So Dr. Taylor is a physician from Harvard Medical School who realized that the indoor air environment is critical for our health. To better understand buildings, she obtained a master's in architecture degree and now studies how humans and microbes are affected by the buildings they spend time in. In addition to her medical work, she is an ASHRAE Distinguished Lecturer and Medical Advisor to Condair. So I'll just pass it over to her and we'll continue. All right, Stephanie.
Hello, everyone. So, so my name is Dr. Stephanie Taylor, and I'm very excited to be a medical advisor for Condair. Condair, the leading company who really has forged the way in understanding the importance of health, the importance of humidification for health. So getting started, for my part of the presentation, which will be about 25 minutes, I'd like to talk with you about 3 general areas. 1, alarming health trends and some new research that's helping us understand those trends, what these new tools and new research has taught us, and then finally, what are the consequences of this new information. So getting started, there are some alarming health trends going on in the world. The incidence of diseases is on the increase, but thankfully we have some new tools that have given us a new understanding of this. So, for example, on the left here in the pink, with pink background, you see some bacteria, and on the right you see a 2017 world map from the CDC that shows in the red text new microbes which are causing diseases. These are previously known microbes that have evolved, as well as altogether new combinations of genes which have created new pathogens. So when I say pathogens, I'm referring to microbes bacteria and viruses that cause disease. Because not all microbes cause disease. So a pathogen is one which does. So here you can see again the red and then the blue text shows different organisms that we thought were under control, but to our alarm have reemerged with new epidemics. And it's not just infectious diseases that are changing. There's also an increase in allergies and autoimmune disorders. So an autoimmune disorder is when our innate or adaptive immune system first fights a virus or a bacterial infection and then somehow confuses our own cells with the pathogen and begins to attack our own cells. And when this happens, you can see on the right, there are all sorts of diseases and all sorts of organ systems that are affected. So these changes are occurring. We don't really know why. Why are microbes more infectious? Why are there more pathogens? Why is our immune system getting confused about what's a human cell and needs to be left alone and what's a pathogen and needs to be attacked? So what else is going on? Another thing we need to take a look at is the change in our shelters. So if you go back many, many, many centuries to the first human shelters, we had a lot of open air communication with soil, with water, with the microbes associated with those things, with each other, with animals. And if you look at this chart, as our buildings have become more sophisticated, as we've tightened them up, even with sanitation, we've also seen a corresponding increase in infectious diseases. So clearly, hygiene strategies are very important and have been very beneficial for us. But recently, something's going on. And you see there's been an increase in infectious diseases as we've enclosed our buildings, started managing the HVAC systems more precisely. As a matter of fact, one of my colleagues says, well, we shape up buildings, then they kill us. So that's a really extreme and alarming statement that we need to take a look at. So how can we take a look at that? How can we take a look at what's going on indoors with microbes and humans? Well, prior to the last 7 years, so up until around 2011, our primary way of investigating what microbes were around was using what we call tissue culture, which is looking for specific pathogens by using the food that we think they like, the incubation temperature and length of time, and then using a microscope to identify the germs that were there. So that's a very helpful strategy. However, tissue culture techniques only showed us what we were looking for. And the resulting mindset of us humans about microbes is that humans are here, microbes are there, they're bad, and all of the germs that we found were usually associated with diseases. But thankfully, we now have another technique. So now we can use genetic analysis tools, which are tools that were initially used primarily in clinical medicine to identify viruses or bacteria, say, in your blood. But we can now use these genetic analysis tools to see all of the bacteria and viruses and fungal organisms in our environment, in our bodies, on our bodies. And what we've learned has completely radicalized our former model of humans and germs. We now know that there are many, many more microbes in our environment and that most of them are good for us. As a matter of fact, each of us, by cell number, is only about 1/3 human. The rest of us, the rest of our bodies are made up of microbes, bacteria, viruses. And again, these help us live. We couldn't survive without them. As a matter of fact, these microbes are on our skin, they're in our airways, they're in our digestive system. If you have a vagina, they're in your vagina. They're everywhere. And they help us live. They help us digest our food. They help us maintain a good mental state. They help our immune system. It's only when we disrupt the communities of microbes, if we start killing certain ones repetitively and fostering the growth of others, that's when we get sick. So what does that mean? What does that look like? So I want to I want to show the viewers this brief video that's based on data, just to give you an idea of what goes on in our environment. So as you're all breathing and I'm talking, little droplets are coming out of our airways, about 100 microns in diameter, and they carry all of the organisms that are in our mouth, our respiratory tract. You can see this engineer is designing a system. You can see that there's skin flakes going from her body onto the table, onto her drawing. That's normal. There's a lot of communication between the air and surfaces. You can see droplets coming from her nose. Again, that's normal. You'll see her digestive system is illuminated. We have a lot of organisms in our digestive system. So you can see that human beings introduce many, many microbes into the indoor environment. So this next slide is really important. This kind of tells a huge story. So occupants, human beings, our pets, whoever is in a building sends their microbes into that space. And then, depending on how a building is designed and ventilated and used, certain microbes are selected to survive. So if you think back to Darwin's survival of the fittest, the indoor environment has become the biggest driver of survival. So just think about that if you're an architect, an engineer, building manager. The space that you are managing and designing is determining the future living organisms. So what about that? Are we, in general, doing a good job with our buildings and selecting for the good microbes as opposed to the pathogens? So this is a study that came from the University of Oregon that unfortunately is showing that sealed and mechanically ventilated buildings have very narrow communities, very non-diverse communities of microbes. And the pathogenicity or the degree of badness in mechanically ventilated buildings is high versus the outdoors that has high diversity and low pathogenicity. So more of the microbes are healthy ones. And if you have operable windows, you're somewhere in the middle of that. So we're doing something in our buildings that's selecting for pathogens, selecting for the bacteria and the viruses that harm human beings. So what's going on? So to get an idea of which indoor parameter might be responsible for this selection of harmful organisms, I decided to look at patient infections. So you may be familiar with healthcare-associated infections, which are the infections that a patient will get from the hospital environment. Unfortunately, the incidence of this is very high in our country. So there's an ongoing study where a group of microbiologists was looking at 10 patient rooms in a brand new hospital and monitoring a lot of environmental parameters. And they were actually tracking bacteria and viruses in the building. So I found out about this study and I said, hey, I'd like to look at patient outcomes. And they said, sure. So the study that I'm going to tell you about looked at the room data that you can see listed there: hand hygiene, temperature, pressurization, etc., indoor and outdoor relative absolute humidity. You can see the list of parameters. We had about 800 environmental data points and about 300 patient outcomes. So we sent all of these data points off to our statistician to see which indoor parameters might be associated with infections. And to our surprise, actually, and to my disbelief initially, if you look at this, you can see along the bottom, along the x-axis, you can see the time of the study going from January through the summer back to January. And then on the y-axis, the relative humidity. What our statistician told us was that as the relative humidity, the average relative humidity in the room went up from about 32 up to a little bit over 40%, infection rate fell. And the microbiologists showed us that when the relative humidity was low, the diversity was low. You don't want low diversity, you want high diversity. So two things were associated with relative humidity around 40%: better patient outcomes and a more diverse, healthy microbe population. So we were a little bit skeptical still because this was totally new. So we did another study. This is over 4 years in an assisted living facility. So we looked at infections in the elderly residents of this facility versus indoor conditions. And again, once again, on the bottom we have relative humidity. On the y-axis we have the average number of infections. And this was not subtle. You can see that when the relative humidity was between 40 and 60% indoors, the respiratory and gastrointestinal infection rate especially were very low. And that was both viral. So for respiratory, the viral infections would be colds, flu, bacterial pneumonia. So there's something very beneficial about an indoor relative humidity range of 40 to 60%. So another study was took this research to the next level by providing an on-site control. So this is a preschool. This was done by the Mayo Clinic, a preschool in northern Minnesota during the winter time, where half of the school was humidified to 45%, and the other half was just left to do what happens in the wintertime in a cold climate. Bring in cold air, heat it up, relative humidity is very low. So comparing the non-humidified spaces to the spaces humidified to 45%, you can see that, number one, there were fewer airborne particles carrying Influenza A virus. This study was focused on the flu. So there were fewer viral particles in the air. The ones that were in the air were less infectious. So infectivity is not always the same for a virus or bacteria. So the humidified spaces had the viruses that were present were less likely to cause disease. And ultimately, and most importantly, the number of kids absent due to influenza was about a third in the humidified part compared to the non-humidified part. So that's huge. That affects not only the children, but their parents and the workforce. So this was a great study because it was very well controlled, and the study's been repeated and with the same results. So let's talk about these studies and what is going on in a dry environment. What's happening to microbes and what's happening to human beings that's causing this increase in disease in a dry environment. Well, we now know that when the relative humidity is less than 40%, the infectivity of pathogens, the bad microbes, is high. We have greater aerosol transmission. We have, it's very difficult to clean surfaces thoroughly. You can't clean your hands, you can't clean surfaces because they're being recontaminated from particles falling out of the air. And if those particles are infectious aerosols, you're recontaminated without having even touched anything. So you don't even know that your hands might be recontaminated. And thirdly, for reasons we don't fully understand, the survival and the virulence, the badness of the pathogens is greater when the air is dry. So to give you a visual idea of how small dried out droplets travel, again, I'm talking you're breathing, droplets come out about 100 microns in diameter, and in a room that's 20% relative humidity, those droplets reach equilibrium with the water vapor in your air, and they quickly desiccate to about 0.5 microns in diameter, at which point they're called droplet nuclei. And they float up into the air through your HVAC system, and they can last not only 21 days, but they've been recovered years later. And we used to think that those tiny 0.5 micron droplets didn't carry any important microbes because we couldn't grow anything from the tiny droplets. But now that we're using these other techniques, we've learned that those 0.5 micron droplets can carry very infectious organisms. They are just waiting for the next hydrated human being to land on or in, and then they cause recurrent disease. So that's the travel. This is a really interesting study that's been replicated many times. This is guinea pigs showing that on the bottom, on the x-axis, we have relative humidity, and on the y-axis, we have how infectious the virus particles are. And you can see when the relative humidity is below 40%, infectivity is high. And at 40%, something happens and the infectivity just plummets. And in this example, the infectivity stays low, but for many viruses, and bacteria, you'll see it's 60% relative humidity. The red line will come back up again. But there's a trough between 40 and 60%, which shows that bacteria and viruses are less infectious in that range. And the information on the right just will address those of you who are thinking about temperature versus humidity. It's humidity that's the key element. So not only are organisms more infectious in a dry environment, but we just learned as of the summer of 2018 that antibiotic resistance is actually spread from bacteria to bacteria more easily when they're in the airborne state. So this, again, if you're a biologist and you've been thinking about vertical transmission of genes, where a bacteria would replicate and then reestablish a community, that takes a little more time than horizontal transfer. So now we've learned that when bacteria is in the air, they can immediately transfer antibiotic-resistant genes between themselves. So this is another reason we don't want to have airborne bacteria. And in fact, if you work in hospitals and you're thinking about hospital-associated infections, the bacteria that cause the infections that patients get from the environment are the ones listed, and they're also the ones, not surprisingly anymore, that survive well in the air. Okay, we've talked about microbes. Let's quickly talk about humans. What happens to our bodies in a dry environment? Well, when the relative humidity is less than 40%, we don't do well. Our brain is affected. We don't think as clearly. We get slight dehydration of our brain tissue, which definitely diminishes the neural transmission between our brain cells. We get tired. We get anxious. Our respiratory tract is affected. We're more vulnerable to infections, allergies, asthma. Anyone who's taken a long airplane ride knows that in that dry environment, your eyes become irritated, maybe watery from tearing, and our skin is affected. Our skin cracks, or the dermatitis pathways begin, and actually we now know that when your skin is dry, proteins and material from outside of your body can intercalate into your skin cells and begin the process that becomes an autoimmune disorder. So cracked skin is not just unsightly and you need to put lotion on. It actually is damaging to our immune system. So why do we get the flu in the winter? Some people say it's crowding, some people say it's a cold, some people say it's low vitamin D levels. Well, we finally have isolated the most important factor that makes us vulnerable to influenza in the winter, and it's dry air. So in 50% relative humidity, if you're exposed to influenza, you might not even get sick, or you might get a little bit sick. But in the winter, with low relative humidity, you can get really sick, and you can actually die or get a subsequent bacterial infection on top of it. Why is that? Well, this paper came out last May. It was done by Dr. Awasaki at Yale. And this paper conclusively shows some of the mechanisms that make us more vulnerable to infection when the air is dry. So her study was actually done in mice, because you can't remove tracheas and lungs of human beings again and again and expect to get away with it. So she used genetically engineered mice that have an immune response that is identical essentially to humans. So mice were preconditioned, then they were infected, and then they were followed in two different relative humidities. What Dr. Awasaki found, she found a couple things. One, that the mucus in our upper respiratory tract becomes slightly dried out, becomes more viscous, and the protective hairs called cilia that wash particles away from our vulnerable lung tissue, the cilia can't work as well when that mucus layer is thicker. So things settle more deeply into our lungs. But she also found, surprisingly, that our bodies don't produce the protective proteins known as interferon when the air is dry. And when there is any inflammation, the repair of that is diminished in dry air. So these are changes in our body that go far beyond increased viscosity of our mucus. And the implications for the disease process in our bodies when the air is dry are huge. We don't do well in dry air. And it's not just our upper respiratory tract. There are damaging occurrences in our lower respiratory tract, in our lungs, that make it much harder for us to resist or recover from infections. And again, our skin is affected very much by dry air. It's not just that we might get unsightly cracks or our wrinkles look worse. We now know that, like I said before, particles from the outside world can enter into our skin and begin this immune response that can lead to autoimmune disorders. We're learning a lot more about the skin, but it's a very powerful part of why we don't want to be in a dry environment. So if we put all this data together, looking at the viruses, bacteria, and looking at human health, we find that there's a sweet spot, relative humidity, 40 to 60%, that's great for people. It keeps us healthy, and it decreases the infectivity of the pathogens. So 40 to 60% is Mother Nature's way of giving us an opportunity to survive and be healthy versus microbes that become pathogens. So it's important. It's very important. So now we're learning from studies, both from clinical medicine, from human health performance, from learning, from office productivity. 40 to 60% is great for people. 40 to 60% also diminishes the bad microbes. So this is new. A lot of us have thought that the drier the better for the building. We now know that's not the case for human beings. If you want to get something to change, you need to address the business model. Well, if you take a look, if you're a business owner or a hospital owner or even a homeowner, think about how much money you spend on the energy for your building. Think about how much you pay for your rent or mortgage. And then if you're a business, look at all the money that you're going to spend on the salary for your employees. So if you can increase salary productivity, employee productivity by 20%, you're going to save a lot of money in addition to doing the right thing. In a hospital, that hospital where we did the study, in 1 year, they lost over $15 million from non-reimbursable care. This is only about a 300 and some bed hospital. They lost $15 million in 1 year, and they tied up 11,000 of their patient bed days with non-reimbursable care. That's hugely impactful to a hospital. If they had humidified even with a very expensive system, which you don't have to use anymore, this business model is a few years old, but I did an ROI showing that if they put in this expensive system to decrease their infections only by 20%, which is totally feasible. Our research shows you can decrease infections more than that. But just looking at a 20% reduction, they could have seen 500% ROI in their first quarter. How often can you make that statement? So again, humidification saves a lot of money for hospitals, businesses, and in your home. So conclusions from my part: 1, the indoor environment is critical for human health. The indoor environment selects our survival modalities, and it's also now the evolutionary force behind which microbes are going to live and affect us. Hydrated indoor air, 40 to 60% relative humidity, supports our health. It supports good microbes, and it prevents us from selecting the bad pathogens. It's also easier to clean your surfaces when things aren't going back up into the air. So we cannot ignore our need for 40 to 60% indoor relative humidity. So thank you so much. And now I'm going to pass this off to Chris, who's going to talk about some energy benefits.
All right, thanks, Stephanie. Clearly, there are powerful, well-documented health benefits for indoor relative humidity between 40 and 60%. Before I pass this along to Chris for his humidification and energy section, I'd like to remind everyone that at any point you can write a question using the GoToWebinar box there, and we'll receive the question and we'll have a period at the end of this to go ahead and answer them. So without further ado, Chris, I'll pass the control over to you, and you can take us away from there.
Thank you very much, Graham and Dr. Taylor. Appreciate it. Graham, I don't quite have control of the mouse yet, and now I do. All right. I'm going to give everybody a second to finish writing their question before I really get into it, because I'm sure there's a few, and Dr. Taylor will be ready to take them in maybe 10 or 15 minutes now. So as Graham mentioned, my name is Chris Habits. My title here is Business Development in Energy and Sustainability, and basically I help our customers decide what is the best way to humidify on first costs, energy use, and recurring costs or operation costs of the humidification system. So if we look at the three different pillars of this, I'm talking about how much carbon do we put into the air, because that's becoming obviously more and more important. How much energy do we actually use? And of course, how much does this cost us annually? So you can see, if you just take a quick glance, that some technologies use more in terms of energy and, of course, cost, and some technologies use less. So the light gray on the left of all three of these graphs is going to be your evaporative technologies, your adiabatic technologies. These are the DL or the high pressure units that use water directly into the airstream without adding any energy in order to evaporate that air. The middle one is the gas systems. So those would be boiling water with natural gas. This particular one is our gas-fired humidifier, but it could also be a steam-to-steam system or a steam injection system, and it just gives you the idea of where that sits. And the one on the right is electric steam. So that is boiling water with electricity to put into the air. And I'll talk about each of these a little bit, but mostly I'm focusing on how much energy and cost we can save by going to an evaporative technology or different technology. So if we move on, the key there, though, is that no matter what we do, we have to put in about 1,000 pounds an hour of energy to go from liquid, so the water coming out of your taps, to water vapor, or what we call humidity. Steam humidifiers use electricity or gas, and we boil that, and evaporative humidification takes that energy from the air itself. So you can see this 1,000 BTUs per pound is the rough value that we use for that. It's a nice round one, though, so it's nice to use. But what does that mean? Well, an electric unit is going to draw 67 kilowatts, but a gas and high pressure unit draw less than 1. So that sounds great, obviously. The gas unit draws almost 250,000 BTUs an hour of gas into it. And of course, the electric and high pressure draws 0. Hard to compare those side by side. So I put those together and we put it all into BTU. So that would be for 200 pounds of steam. All of them are roughly the same. You'll notice we have 210,000, 220,000, 205,000. It's all the same. The real question is, where does that energy come from and how much does that energy cost? You might be a little confused over at this high pressure one here. 3,000 to 205,000, maybe even more. It's because it really depends where that energy is coming from. Now, if we translate that into dollars, the electric unit is going to cost you about $6 to put 200 pounds of water into the air. And just for reference sake, 200 pounds an hour is probably one wing of a hospital, for example, or the Condair building uses roughly 200 pounds an hour of humidification. We're a 110-person office, for example. The gas humidifier will cost you about $1 for those 200 pounds. And a high pressure system has a bunch of question marks. And this is because I don't know where heat is coming from. We can range from $0 all the way to $6 for those 200 pounds. And remember, 200 pounds per hour, you're going to run that 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 hours a year. So these numbers can really add up. Normally, it's between $0 and $1 for a high pressure and evaporative system because the heat is either free or it's a gas heat system. So I'd like to talk a little bit about rules of thumb, but these are the different ways we put water into the air. Electricity, pressure, steam. So electricity is obvious. We're boiling water, tea kettle style, or with electrodes. Pressure, steam, we are using a pressure boiler system, normally gas. Gas-fired is a dedicated gas humidification, and then there are a variety of evaporative technologies. If we look at the gas, again, electric is the two on the left, electrode and resistive, gas steam, and then we can use central steam as well. All of these boil water. So all of these have the energy put in directly to the system itself to put water into the air. In the evaporation, and yes, there are a lot of different technologies here, but in evaporation, all of these are using cold water and spraying it or in some way evaporating it into the air directly without adding any energy to the system. At most, some of these use a small pump, but for the most part, there is zero energy going directly into the humidifier itself. So normally in healthcare and many office buildings, we're on the left-hand side here in the HVAC. So we're evaporating with the media system or spraying water into the air with high pressure or combining the two into one nice technology that allows for less duct space. And then, of course, we can also put water directly into the air in an office building in the space above people's heads. And this is actually becoming quite popular. It is very energy efficient and easy to retrofit. So that would be the systems here, the high pressure nozzle systems in the middle. Now, if I'm rule of thumbing this, the more outside air you have and the smaller your humidification load down in the bottom left-hand corner is where we're going to look most likely at a steam technology. So this will be your 15 or 20 pounds an hour. You're more likely to look at steam down here because the capital cost won't justify it. Now, if we're accepting that having a properly humidified building is important to your bottom line from what we just saw from Dr. Taylor, and I hope we're all accepting that at this point, then 15, 20 pounds an hour will look down here. If we go higher up on the scale where we have a larger humidification load or less required outdoor air, even if you're using an economizer, less required outdoor air, that's when we really start to look at a real payback from an evaporative system. Looking at this a second way, if your cooling season is longer, so you cool for more of the year, then again, we're going to be looking at an adiabatic or evaporative system. If you're heating for much of the year, a steam system might be the not more efficient or less energy using, but it might be more close to equivalent, and the payback might be longer. So back to this again. Now that we've seen a little bit of the background, we can see the electricity system is putting in almost $30,000 a year of electricity for this 300 pound an hour system, whereas gas and evaporative are using $5,000 or $4,000 a year of that energy and water costs. So there's quite a significant swing there. You can also see the total energy usage has gone down between the gas and the evaporative, but between gas and electric, they're approximately the same. It's just gas is less expensive than electricity. And carbon is a little bit more complicated. It depends a lot where your electricity comes from. If you are a coal-fired state, this number will be larger. If you are a nuclear-fired province, like Ontario, where I live, our electricity carbon output is actually quite low and probably beats natural gas. Rule of thumb, this is the average for the United States of America. So we're not in a bad position to use this as an average. And evaporative has some, and this is mostly because sometimes we have to heat the air. So I'm going to show the psych chart again. It will only be on for a moment, so don't panic. But here it is. Basically, this is showing where the energy is saved. So if you are somebody who likes psychrometric charts, when we boil water and we go straight up in that teal color there, we're adding energy to the system. For an evaporative system, we are just taking a different mixed air point or a warmer air coming in and putting some water towards it, and therefore ending up at the same point but using significantly less energy. So if you wanted to know the mechanics, there's a very brief overview of the mechanics. Now, this all sounds complicated, and this slide doesn't help because it is actually relatively complicated. But the point I'm trying to make here is that even in the smaller loads, even in the 100% outside air, your evaporative system, if you choose to go to an evaporative humidification system, will use at most the same amount of energy as a steam system and will probably cost you less. And as we go up those two different charts that I showed here earlier, as we go towards smaller outside air or a larger humidification load, it will cost you significantly less. And most office buildings, larger office buildings, hospitals, warehouses are passing into that level of evaporative is probably the right choice long term. Case studies, you can find them at the Condair website, www.condair.com, under downloads, but this is just one example. They were boiling almost 300 kilowatts worth of steam. It's roughly 300 pounds an hour, if I recall correctly, and we removed 294 of those kilowatts from the system. There was a little bit of a heat penalty, but for the most part, this was almost free humidification year-round. And this was obviously very strict hygiene and indoor climate restrictions here. So very brief example, but 300 kilowatts of electricity will cost you a lot of money over the year, or your customer a lot of money over the year. And Condair can reduce that significantly by using evaporation instead. Question we always have is water use. So if you've already typed it, I'm going to cover it here and it will probably come up again anyway. But yes, evaporative technologies do tend to use a little bit more water, but rarely does that additional water use make a dent in your savings. And yes, I just read from the slide, but it's just because it needs to be followed up upon. Additionally, when we use an evaporative humidification technology, we're reducing electricity use or we're reducing gas use. And both of those take water to mine or to create. So depending on, again, your state, we might be reducing water use overall. So if that's important to you, we can look at that. But generally, the water use on site is going to be slightly higher for evaporative humidification. What does it actually look like? So this is the combined technology I was talking about. It's called the Condair Dual. It sits inside the air handler. It has a ceramic media and then a pressurized nozzle spray that sprays onto this. So this is certified for a whole variety of hygiene standards so that we know this is very safe to use in healthcare and office space and anywhere you need to make sure nothing is growing in your air handler, which, to be honest, is everywhere if you have an air handler. So this is our preferred system for evaporative induct technologies, and then of course we can do it in space with a high pressure system instead. But this is what that would look like inside your air handler. Really what I'm trying to conclude here is that your evaporative technology, if you choose to humidify, you really do want to take a look at evaporative technologies. They are not always 100% the right choice, but a lot of the time the cost of the steam system moving forward will outweigh the cost of the evaporative system. With Condair, we can provide either, and we're happy to provide either and guide you in choosing the right humidifier for your application in order to save the thousands of dollars every year on productivity costs or healthcare costs, 6 days, etc., that humidification can make a major difference for. And I will pass it back to Graham to close us off.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So a couple of promotions from Condair. Today, Boston 25 News aired an interview with Dr. Taylor, actually, and Sam Shepard, our Boston agent. So it's available on their website now with an article there as well, and the link is at the bottom. Second, we'll be at the AHR 2020 in Orlando. Our booth number is 2035. We'll have all of our humidification products there. We're launching a new desiccant dehumidifier in the upcoming year, and we'll have new residential products as well. So if you're going to be at the show, make sure to stop by. And finally, I will open up for questions here. Looking through, Let's see. Pretty much all of your studies, I believe, were conducted in hospital type environments. I'm trying to get the pop out to work here. Have there been any studies? Just having difficulty with this. Oh. Have there been any studies done in office, retail, or other environments to show that humidification impacts human health just as significantly? From Garrett.
So this is Dr. Taylor. I can take that one on. So of the studies that I showed you, 2 out of 3 were in a healthcare setting. But it's interesting, what we're learning from that setting also applies to the rest of us in homes and offices and schools. And yes, there have been studies done. Actually, one from the U.S. government through the GSA, General Services Administration, network is going to be published in January. They looked at buildings all over the U.S. because they were noticing difference in office worker productivity and physiological stress symptoms. They found, and again, they didn't expect to find this. They found that when the relative humidity was less than 30%, which was their cutoff, or over 60%, the office workers were stressed. They had higher cortisol levels, different heart rate variability levels, both signs of stress. So in the dry environments, they were more stressed, and they didn't sleep as well at night. And we think that has to do with cortisol production by your skin. So that was in an office building, and there have been studies in schools, a very good one out of Switzerland, showing that students' exam performance was significantly decreased when the school indoor air either had low relative humidity, and also this study looked at carbon dioxide and temperature. But all 3 of those variables were important for learning. So low relative humidity, less learning. So to answer your question, yes, studies have been done in the non-medical environment and show the same thing.
Thanks, Stephanie. I got one here from Danny. What is the minimum time to be exposed to 40 to 60% RH for it to be beneficial? So how long do we have to stay in the humidified environment to see benefits?
So at 40% relative humidity, 80% of infectious viral particles are inhibited or eradicated by 40% relative humidity. So studies show that in 15 minutes, both infectivity decreases, and conversely, in a dry environment, within 15 minutes, your airway epithelial cells are beginning to see signs of damage. So it happens fast, bottom line.
Okay. I've got one here from Chris. Why isn't this in code? Is it just too new? Or what's the history behind it?
I mean, I can touch on that, and I'm sure Dr. Taylor, you can as well. Basically, codes fall behind in terms of what is proven in studies, and yeah, I'd say a lot of this research is relatively new. You can go back into the mid-'80s and look at some of this, but ASHRAE and different energy bodies and HVAC bodies haven't really stepped forward on this yet. I would hope to see some movement on that in the near future.
So this is Dr. Taylor. I think that's a great question, and I think that the answer is actually sort of multi-level. One, it's difficult for human beings to change their attitudes, and we've really thought that humidity can be detrimental to a building. So that's one thing. It's hard to embrace new ideas. Secondly, the medical profession and the building profession have created 2 very different sort of silos, to use that terminology, in education and terminology and in what we consider important. So on one silo, you have clinicians saying, hey, we need to provide adequate water vapor for human beings. On the other silo, building professionals are saying, we don't want to spend the money for humidifiers. We don't want to have to clean them or run them. So there are these 2 separate mindsets. And building codes are primarily established by the engineering and architectural people. So it's a new concept, but I can reinforce what Chris said in that ASHRAE is changing. ASHRAE is changing rapidly, and the CDC and the Facility Guideline Institute are very interested in this topic. So I think we're going to see very rapid change, actually.
Okay. I think we got time for maybe a couple more. Let's see. Dr. Taylor, you might be able to answer this. What's the physical process that happens that reduces infectivity of airborne microbes when in 50% humidity?
Well, whoever asked that question, let's talk behind the scenes and we can win a Nobel Prize if we figure it out, because we don't really know. There are some things we do know. We know that there are membrane changes in dry air that protect the inside of a droplet and protect bacteria and viruses, but we really don't know all of the sort of mechanical forces that occur outside of a cell that are then transmitted to the both DNA and the epigenetic material. So short answer, we don't really know. We have some ideas, but it's an important question and an important answer.
Yeah,
Great question.
Always tougher to prove causation than correlation, right?
Well, yes, plus it's just hard to, again, we're just learning more and more about the transmission of forces from outside of the cell membrane to inside the genetic material. So we're learning new things, and it's a bit of a complicated process, apparently.
Okay. We've got a question from Bob. What about the effects on comfort and being able to keep temperatures lower in a building due to humidity being higher?
Sure, I can take a look at that one, and Graham, I'm sure you could actually answer that as well. But there is, I mean, you know, when you go to Vegas, people say it's a dry heat, and if you go to Miami, you sweat when you wipe your brow, which really defeats the purpose of wiping your brow. So there is an effect between humidity and temperature. As you get into that 40, 50, 60%, probably closer to the 40, 50, and you can actually lower your air temperature, and it will feel the same skin temperature, basically. So you can sit in a 70-degree room at 50% and feel as comfortable as a 74-degree room at 10%. And don't quote me on those exact numbers, but it'll be fairly close to that. So there's a little bit of energy trade-off there that I didn't even talk about in my presentation.
Thanks, Chris. All right. We'll go with one more here. Can we fix this with more filtration or more outdoor air?
Do you want me to take that one for starters?
If you want to start on it, Dr. Taylor, and I'll finish it off with an energy talk, but if you go ahead.
So filtration would definitely help reduce all particles in a room, which, you know, you may or may not want, but it would diminish the total pathogen load. And outdoor air, unless you live in Beijing, also will bring in a healthier mix of microbes, and probably, again, depending on the climate, may bring in moisture. The problem with filtration and outdoor air is it doesn't address the changes that occur in the human being in a dry environment. So while you can remove pathogens or microbes, it's going to do nothing to build up the health or the immune system of the human occupant indoors. For that, you need water vapor.
And adding on to that, I mean, both filtration to the level we're talking about here is relatively expensive to move enough air through to make that much of a difference. You need to upsize your air handler, bigger filters, more replacement, as well as outdoor air. I mean, anybody who's an HVAC knows more outside air is generally more expensive unless it happens to be 55 degrees outside. So yeah, both of them help. Both of them are probably more expensive than adding humidification.
All right, thanks. With that, I will conclude our webinar. I want to thank everyone for attending. We will be sending out email follow-up containing the presentation. It'll have all of the links and our contact information here. And I'd finally, just like to thank everyone for tuning in and listening. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.